So lecture one was about the foundations of management and organization. Here are a few learning points.
In this lecture, we really introduce you to the history of management and organizational studies, beginning with the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, so as we noted, I was developed during the course, the Industrial Revolution was about big changes, major technologies being introduced, which led to a change of the way things were produced. So we moved from a model where you had a few big organizations such as manufacturers, but most of the things people were using, most of the objects were produced in small workshops with a master and a few apprentices, and that was very small units. With the Industrial Revolution and introduction of technology such as steam, the steel, we were able, with steam power notably, to create these big factories that would bring together huge groups of workers, and that would be able to produce a new set of objects with a very different approach.
And this led to the need for a manager. If you have big factories manufacturing lots and lots of products on a mass scale, you need to be able to organize those people. And so initially it brought all kinds of problems in the organization of people, finally leading to the birth of the idea of the manager.
Another very important idea that came around the same time, different countries, different time, but around the same era, was the introduction of limited liability. And that was the beginning of major modern corporations. Basically, if you were, running a small business as a locksmith or any trade where you would be manufacturing small things, you were fully liable. Meaning, if business went wrong, well, you had to sell your house and to live in the street. The principle of limited liability introduced the idea that any person could invest some money into a company and their liability would be limited to the amount they had invested. So if you invest $100, well, that's what you can lose, but you're not liable and you wouldn't have, beyond the $100, you wouldn't have to sell your house. That was a very important principle to allow to pool resources from a big group of stockholders and to finance and fund the big modern corporations that we know today.
Limited liability legislation allowed for the selling of shares, so you have many shareholders who are in effect the owners of the company but not liable for anything that goes wrong there. With all of these shareholders, lots and lots of capital can be amassed to do management and organizations on a massive scale. One of the first theorists to give us a theory of management is Frederick W. Taylor. He was an engineer by profession, and in essence he tried to apply engineering principles to the management of people. This involved breaking tasks down to very small components that they could be done exactly the same way each and every time. And so workers didn't have to be skilled in any way. In fact, Taylor preferred unskilled laborers, and they would be given a manual that didn't even have words in it. It was just diagrams, and the employees just had to do their very small component as part of a larger picture or a larger scheme. So in essence, people almost become like cogs in a big organizational machine.
Now, a bit later down the track, other researchers started to introduce another element that was actually very important, and that is the other root, if you want, of modern approach to management. And it was the idea, with researchers such as Mayo or Follett, it was the idea that the human factor was more than what could be organized only through scientific management. A very famous experiment by Mayo called the Hawthorne experiment studied how by changing working conditions you could have an impact on productivity. Now, a surprising outcome of the study was, of course, if you improve working conditions, productivity will improve. But then they went back to the original conditions and productivity was still high. That was a very surprising result. What they found is that actually people were the social dimensions was very important, and that people were appreciating the fact that we were actually observing them, asking questions, that they were actually the subject of an experiment. And also they created connection, they discussed the experiment. So that work would have a different meaning for them and that they will be fully committed. That was the start of what could be called a key debate or a big debate in management, and that's still very much there today. And that's one of the fundamental tensions of management.
In fact, Elton Mayo was an Australian from the University of Queensland, and he took up work at Harvard University. He was a psychologist before he became a management scholar, and he was dealing with returned soldiers after World War II that were struggling with post-traumatic stress, and he found that, was it World War One?
It would be World War One.
I'm sorry about that. World War One.
A long time ago.
And he found that, in fact, the psychologist didn't have to provide any special cure, but just rather show interest in the soldier and give them an opportunity to talk, to take notes as that person spoke, and suggested that if a manager applied a similar approach to employees, treat them as people, listen to their concerns, their anxieties, show interest in them, they will feel valued and important, and they'll give their very best effort. So then we have Frederick W. Taylor's ideas on one side and Elton Mayo's human relations idea on the others that lead to this tension that Emmanuel's been speaking of.
And that's still there, which means that when we look at how organizations operate today, well, you see this tension between the necessity to introduce rules, to have organized things that come from the top to the bottom, and procedures, norms are still imposed. But managers today have to be aware, and they can't be efficient if they aren't, about the limitation of such rules and the fact that, well, you need to support people. You need to bring something more than just, do what you are told. And so schools of management and different approaches will have articulated these two perspectives very often, and that's the approach we have taken. It's summarized in terms of bureaucratic and post-bureaucratic.
And this is also summed up in McGregor's very famous articulation of theory X and theory Y. Theory X being the hard or Taylorist approach, a bureaucratic approach to management and organizations, and then theory Y being a more empowering, supportive, human relations type approach, post-bureaucratic approach to managing organizations.
As managers, it's something you have to tackle, and you have to know when it's time to impose a norm, fix a direction, and when it's time to listen and to actually help people gather the strength around a project. Now, before we conclude on that one, let's have a quick reminder about one of the videos that we gave you to watch, and that was an interesting reconstitution about how Ford had revolutionized the production of goods.
Ford applied the ideas of Frederick Taylor in a very impressive manner, in a revolutionary manner, particularly with his assembly line approach. So remember Taylor breaking up ideas into small components and divvying them amongst your employees. Well, Henry Ford took that idea to the next level.
And he introduced the principle of the assembly line, which means that to produce a car, instead of having workers gathering around the car and in a not very efficient way, that was the idea of a conveyor belt that will bring the car in front of each worker so that they could actually do their work more efficiently. So that led to mass production, big factories, mass production, cheaper cars that could be affordable by a bigger number of customers.
Ford also applied a human relations type of approach as well. He paid his employees much higher than the regular wages that were being paid in the US at the time, and really gave a lot of effort to supporting his employees so that they felt strongly identified with their work and with the organization.
As long as they were non-unionist, which he didn't like at all.
That's true.
However, that was the introduction of a first idea around mass consumption, with the principle that you can't sell cars to a lot of people if they can't afford it. So while the wages approach was obviously giving an edge to Ford, having the best workers and supporting them, there was also the idea that you needed to develop customers and a middle class that could buy your products. And that's what illustrated in this video, and you can have a look again. Very interesting and instructive one. That's it for lecture 1. We'll meet you for lecture 4 in the next video. Thank you.